Hi, people on Twitch. We're live now.
Hello, people on Twitch. Let's see. Ding, 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 ding,
He's figuring something out.
ding.
Hi, Crowboy.
Boy, you make us laugh because you're so efficient. It's uncanny.
Sometimes Leo and I say hi to him before he's even in there. Immediately responds.
He's
Salsa
actually
by a
just,
C. What a great name.
that's really good.
I want some salsa by
Perfect,
a C.
Salsa. Are you in here often, Salsa? I think this is the first time I've seen that.
I would remember a name like that. That's a good name.
Yeah, I would think so.
You get to start, Ben?
I think so. Let me double check any notes. Oh, yeah. Remind me. I'll do it right now, actually, but I was gonna make the meetup poll go live in the middle of the show
Ooh, that's fun.
so we can kind of watch the first things come in and kind of make our predictions and stuff.
Oh,
Although, do you
exciting.
think it's a spoiler or like we're steering the vote if we make predictions? I don't think that would steer it too much, would
I
it?
don't think so. I think people will
Okay.
vote because the whole point is like, could you go to these places? Not do you want to, right? So we've
Right.
kind of steered it
Right.
that way.
I would think so. So yeah, I'm ready to make it live right during the show here.
Exciting. I'm so curious to see what gets picked. That's what's the
Oh
most
my god,
fun.
I am too. We're gonna be going someplace weird. All up to them. But yeah, I'm ready to start the show whenever you are.
Thanks for the sub, Alchemist. They say, woo, couch Ben. New Ben
Hell
unlocked.
yeah.
Exactly. Well, hello and welcome to Bonus Pod, the companion podcast to the Min-Max Show. My name is Haley McLean. Happy Monday. And today I'm joined by Couch Ben. Hi, Ben.
Hi, I'm Couch Ben. I'm like normal Ben, but relaxed and chill. And
So
despite being in
chill.
the middle of a move, I just could not be more calm in my soul, Haley.
How moving is truly the worst. How is it for you? I
It's
hate moving.
truly the worst. It sucks on every front. The physical aspect, the emotional aspect. It's just a lot of. It's just so weird how you just have to remix your entire house and you open a big, container and it's like, what? Why is this in here with this? What are these cables for? I don't even know if I need these cables anymore. And it's just all of that stress then combined with, moving all the MinMax studio stuff. So it's like 5 times the amount of cables and then trying to figure out like, okay, is this a good podcast space? And imagine trying to like lay out your house, but then also have the additional pressure of like, well, I guess also millions of people online will see how I laid this room out. And it's a just complete mess.
I
The
was going to
Alchemist
ask that
asking,
question. Yeah. Do you hire movers or did you box everything
no,
yourself? Oh,
no, we boxed it all up ourselves. We had 2 friends come over and help us like carry some of the big stuff, which was nice, and
nice.
we paid them. So I don't know. I guess that counts a little bit as movers, but it was the first time where I rented a U-Haul. You got U-Haul up in Canada, right?
Yeah. No, I've used U-Haul for my moves too.
I've never used them before. I assumed that it was going to be a ridiculous amount of money, and
Oh.
like for moving, I don't know how many miles it was, under 10 miles, I guess. The total for having a 20-foot truck to do that entire move, it was like $70. I would have paid 500 for this. Like, are you kidding me? Like, letting me have this semi truck to put all my stuff in? I was blown away. So this is really an ad for U-Haul, our new sponsor for MinMax.
I could see that. I could see us being sponsored by U-Haul. I know. I was surprised by how affordable it was too. And it's like they try to scare you. Like if you don't bring the keys back, it's another $70. I'm like, okay, that's not that crazy of a
Oh,
punishment.
that's funny.
I'm
I,
comfortable with
I
that.
wish I would have been scared a little bit more because I had the complete opposite where I went to the U-Haul and the lady behind the counter was just talking about how hungover she was and how she needed to shut the store down so she could go get a Gatorade next door. And she just handed me the keys. And I'm like, do I have to have these back? She's like, yeah, I guess by when we close, whatever. But I was expecting like a lesson on like, hey, here's how to drive a big truck.
Yeah.
Nothing of the sort. There was no questions asked when I brought it back. Like I ran over just one curb, but I was petrified driving something that big because there's no rear view mirror. You can't see behind you. Like it, you know how when you're driving on the road and you see a student driver and it's
Yeah.
like, ooh, I gotta steer clear of that person. Give them some wide, wide berth,
A
wide girth.
berth. Birth, yeah.
Birth. Clearly it's birth. I don't even know why I'd suggest anything else. And I was like, the takeaway was we should all be so much more scared of U-Haul trucks on the road because these are just schlubs like me who are driving a, Hyundai and then shifting up to a huge truck on an interstate. Like, do not go anywhere near a U-Haul truck because they are scared and confused inside.
I think that's kind of a rule too, yeah. Give them the widest of berths because it's probably a teen moving to university or something like that.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Fair. Yeah, I would imagine all setting up all the computers is going to be the worst. When I just moved in November here, and when I dismantled my setup, it was only like one computer, 2 monitors, not that crazy, but just like, was this the wire for this? Was this the wire? Oh, it's just something about it. It makes me want to die inside. It's my least favorite thing.
Yeah, it's tough, and it's like, okay, this is too boring, but it's like, okay, am I splitting my solo podcasting space from where I play games? Are those two different rooms now? It seems like they are. So then, like, what are the ramifications of that? What tech goes where? How would I stream a PlayStation game if I want to? So it's just there's 1,000 things we need to iron out. But for listeners, the takeaway is, I should be up and running in the solo podcast space for a regular episode of the Min-Max Show this week. And then the studio space, well, here's hoping, we'll see. And then the studio space, that might be a little while. We still need to like finish off the basement where it's all going. Mm-hmm. And so I would say probably 2 months to be safe before we have like an in-person studio stream, which is largely why I wanted to join you on this episode of your lovely podcast, Haley, is I feel like we're kind of due for kind of a business check-in because I feel this extra guilt of anytime we're inconsistent on our shows or like quiet on the scheduling or when another show from the series is coming up, I feel really guilty and weird about it. And so I thought I'd jump on just to be like, hey, here's all the things going on with Min-Max because there's a lot of little odds and ends at the moment.
For sure. And we got a lot of questions, businessy questions.
Yeah.
We put out a Google Doc earlier today.
I mean, yeah, to be clear, it was like, normally we collect questions from people at the Min-Max Council tier for this type of thing, but it's like, there should be an opportunity every once in a while for kind of everybody who's a Patreon supporter to jump in and ask any businessy related questions if they want. Like, I really, really loved, at Easy Allies, Brandon Jones used to do a show called Cup of Jones, and he was largely kind of businessy behind the scenes stuff, and it was so satisfying, and I think it was really helpful for the community to be like, okay, here's where we're at as a company right now, here's where this is, and we definitely hit on kind of the bigger things for scheduling and stuff like that with our other shows, but I thought we're kind of due for kind of laying out some odds and ends. So could I run down some basics before we jump into fun stuff? Mm-hmm. Haley, you need to yell at me because every time I come on Bonus Pod, I feel like, hey, I run the show, here I go, and I'm just running with it. Okay, all right, good.
No worries.
So basic things, cream of the steam, I felt guilty about. We were planning on doing a final cream of the steam in the Min-Max studio. Scheduling issues came up. It's kind of been a tough one to schedule. So the show isn't dead. I appreciate those odd messages I get every once in a while. People being like, cream of the steam, where's cream of the steam? We still love doing the show. But, a while ago we shifted for it being in-person only, which I do think makes it a lot better as a show. Yeah. But at the same time, scheduling has been more challenging than expected for that show. So it's not dead. It's not going to be every month for a little while here, but once we get the new studio up and running, definitely want to bring it back. If it continues to be a real bearcat to challenge and to schedule and stuff, we can revisit it and maybe make it a remote thing so anybody could join. But that's cream of the steam status.
I have always appreciated the in-personness of those streams, though. Like it does hit different to have like a exclusive show that is in-person content. Not that it couldn't, because I would love to be on it in the future if we do make it, anyone could join. But yeah, it is fun to have a show like that too.
I think it helps. Yeah, I was thinking of you for volunteering. I think you and Kelsey are like, oh, I would do that show if it was remote. It's like, yes, that's great. I think let's try and hold on to it. I feel stubborn for holding on to in-person stuff every once in a while, but like I think the deepest dive on Rebirth I think was so much better because of that. Even though we would have loved to have you for D&D, I think that was so much better.
Oh yeah,
for being 100%. In person. And so let's see. Trivia Tower is another one. I know we've talked about it a lot on the show in the past. No episode in May. Huber is still on the docket for hosting episodes in the future. We're probably going to be swapping around, swapping back and forth. The long and short of it, as I've mentioned before, is doing that show every month is a stressful buildup. And so even, for Huber hosting it, it's like I felt like the wheels were starting to come off for just our own communication and just the challenge of pulling that show together every month. And so I think in a perfect world, Trivia Tower is going to be a more sporadic thing moving into the future of every couple of months we'll have an episode, make it more of an event type feel, and kind of the behind the scenes thing, which we can get into a little bit later when we get to community questions and stuff, is, the maybe more logical route in my mind is like, do we only do an episode of Trivia Tower if it's being sponsored? And that way it could pay for itself if we have Huber hosting,
Yeah.
And that pace feels about right for how often we'd have a sponsored episode roll around. It should be every 2 to 3 months, maybe, unless a lot of people come knocking on our door. So that might be the route we're going for Trivia Tower in the future, but just so you have a sense there. Deepest Dive. Deepest Dive on Rebirth was so much fun. We want to do another one, of course. We have plans for one, which are, I don't know, Haley, you've been in those meetings. I'd say 85% locked down.
Yeah.
For the plans of what the next one's going to be. It's not going to be in the very, very near future, but it'll be in the near future. And if you can piece that together, there you go. So stay tuned for Deepest Dive announcements. I'd say next month. But we were talking about doing a couple different options. We're kind of waffling back and forth. And it got to that point of like, you know what? With my move and Doc Lightning going on throughout all of May, combined with we've got the town showdown for people voting to choose where we're going for the September Min-Max community meetup. It was like, I think it's overkill to also be like, yeah, Deepest Dive as well. It's like we can space that a little bit and give me some time to breathe, and we can have a really fun one coming up in June.
Yeah.
So that's where all that stuff is at. And then, yeah, should we get to the town showdown stuff? Because clock's ticking on that.
So excited. I saw some people being like, is the vote done? Is it up? Like they were excited to see and that's the thing is like, is it going to be the kind of thing where one takes an early lead and then that's just is the winner the long term, or is there going to be a battle where one comes back? I'm so curious to see.
Yeah, I hope it's a battle and it goes all over the place.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see how it goes. So just for a refresher, if you're not familiar with this, we are having a big Min-Max community meetup in September to celebrate Min-Max's 5th anniversary, which is technically in October, but the weather's going to be worse, so we're just doing it in September. And so we did a stream last week where we whittled it down from hundreds of wonderful options submitted on Patreon to 7 different towns across the United States only. So those towns are, of course, Ketchum, Idaho, Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. Well, let me give more of a description because it's more fun, I guess. Ketchum, Idaho, which is a small ski town, but it looks awesome, and it'd be pretty outdoorsy in the mountains. But it seems fantastic, and it's called Ketchum, which is just cool for cool gamers.
Yeah.
So Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, which is world renowned as the mushroom capital of the world. So if you want a bunch of mushroom themed stuff and a mushroom festival, that's in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. There's Asheville, North Carolina, which is kind of quirky, hippy-dippy city in North Carolina that Jacob Geller is a big fan of, but it seems absolutely beautiful in the Blue Ridge Mountains. A lot of options there. Williamsburg, Virginia, which has a lot going on quietly. There's the Busch Gardens. Yeah, the Busch Gardens Amusement Park. There's ghost tours. There's massive decaying president heads. There's a board game and RPG festival. There's a lot going on in that one. I don't know how to pronounce this one. I'm sorry. Gloucester, Massachusetts. How do I say this, Haley?
Or Gloucester?
That's what I thought I was saying, and everyone said, stop, you're butchering it, stop. But we'll go there and find out.
Gloucester.
So it's America's Gloucester, thank you. It is
Rich.
America's oldest seaport. Beautiful beaches, it's great seafood. It's 10 minutes away from Salem, Massachusetts, where the witches were, where the witches still roam. So that'd be a fun thing to visit in September.
Do that.
Akron, Ohio, which is pretty centralized. We can rent out a movie theater there. There's some biking. There's a functioning blimp hangar, a bunch of odds and ends in Akron, Ohio. San Marcos, Texas is the last contender, which is near Austin there, and San Antonio. There's a river we can go tubing, kayaking. They have a big mall, museum, stuff like that. And so San Marcos, Texas, which is kind of a college town, is the last pick. I am going to make this post live, and we can check it at the end of the show.
Okay, I will look. I want to look like as soon as you post it, the winner will be listed or something.
I know.
I'll just wait till the end of the show.
Do you have a prediction out of the 7? What you think's going to take it?
I saw a lot of love for Akron,
I know.
Ohio. I saw a lot of people excited for that one. I think Williamsburg seems really cool just because of all the cool stuff it has going for it. I can't remember the member who submitted it, but they provided beautiful little Google Doc breakdown of all these things, and I read through it even after the stream. I was like, this place sounds awesome. So I'm excited for any of them, but I don't know, something about the Ohio pick. I feel like that might win somehow, and I don't know if it's just most people live near there. A lot of Ohio WinMax fans.
I think we're being influenced too because Ohio came up so many times for the towns that people were submitting. So it's like, okay, are there just a lot of Ohio people in MinMax, or will the crowd be like, hey, screw this, I want to go to a beautiful mountain town in Ketchum, Idaho? Because
or something.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, we talked about it a little bit. I haven't made the thing live yet, but my prediction is also Akron. But I would love to go to any of these, and I'm not pushing for Akron, to be clear. I'm not wanting to go there over anything else. I'm just saying, I think if I was a gambling man, I think that'll take it, but please surprise me. Read the descriptions, do your own research. But, we talked about it a little bit at the end of the show about, like, who's voting for this? Are people voting for where they want the meetup to happen for the sake of the travelogue? Or should you only vote if you're planning on attending? And you all convinced me, and the community convinced me that I was way off. I was way wrong, that we should try to emphasize as much as possible. Only vote on this poll on Patreon if you're planning on attending. Because that prioritizes the people who are going to be traveling, obviously, to find a place that's easy for them to travel to. But then also, it shows us a rough idea of how many people would be attending each place. Because I don't know if it's going to be 20 people showing up, 100 people showing up. And so if we could have that poll actually reflect that in some way, it would help our planning for what's going to be going on here. So if you're listening, you can obviously vote in the poll if you're planning on attending this community meetup in September.
And it lets you pick more than one place, right? Like you could say, I could attend all of these. Okay. Yeah.
Yep, for sure. Okay, and I think the poll is going to be running throughout this week. Let me double check. The 24th, that's Friday? Is that how time works?
Yes. That's
okay, great. Days. So midnight on Friday. So I will make it live right now. Good luck, everybody. Go to Patreon and vote for the town you want to travel to. But yeah, I felt bad about prioritizing. Like, my angle was very much, oh, well, we should let everyone in the community vote because that's more fun. Just where are we going to be sent to? But I understand there's some conflicting tension between, oh, wouldn't it be funny to go to a wacky small town? And hey, the community's been waiting to go to a big community meetup. Let's prioritize that.
Yeah.
And I think that's completely fair. I think there's a part of me that just, I feel guilty and weird, but I need to get over this about that idea of like shooting a flare up and be like, everybody come be inconvenienced and come to us. I just like, I feel so weird about that. But at the same time, I've been telling people for over 4 years now for all of our community meetups, like, don't fly in, don't travel too far, please.
Yeah.
And this is the time where it's like, okay, if you want to travel, go ahead and travel. Let's have a good time in a small town together. But I always want to be really clear on the communication front that, if you're going to be traveling for the community meetup in September, we're going to lock down the dates once we lock down that location. Don't expect it's going to be a full weekend of you going kayaking with Haley. Like, we're going to be shooting a travelogue, and we're going to be going and having this community meetup at an event space or a brewery or something like that. We'll try and find a nice venue. And I am very much looking forward to thanking everybody who flies out there in person and spending some good hours there. But don't think it's going to be, a full weekend of touring around with the MinMax crew. if that makes sense, Haley, just to set expectations for
No, that's
folks that
super
are thinking
valid
about traveling.
to set the expectations because that could be the difference between someone deciding to come and not coming. So it's good to just be clear about that for sure.
Yeah. All right. If you had to guess what town was in the lead right now, what would you guess?
The Ohio one.
What if I told you that Ohio is not in the lead? It has 2 votes at the moment.
Okay.
In the lead, Asheville, North Carolina, and
Interesting.
Williamsburg, Virginia at the moment.
Interesting. I'd like to go to. I'd like to go to any of them. They all sound so cool.
I know.
I was talking to my friend last night about it because I was explaining to her the concept. I was like, she's like, when's the next time you're going on a trip? I was like, oh, September probably. She's like, oh, where are you going? I was like, I don't know yet. She's like, what do you mean? And I had to explain the concept of this travel like log community meetup thing. She's like, what are the towns? And I like ran through them with her, and she's like, that's so cool. It's fun. And I think a lot of people will also feel this way. It's fun to have an excuse to go somewhere, especially these kind of smallish towns. You might end up finding a place that's really unique and fun, and you would never go there because Disney World's not nearby or your grandma's not nearby or like something like that.
Yep. I mean, I don't think at any point in my life I'd be like, getting on a plane to Williamsburg. But I like American history. I think that sounds freaking cool. I'm excited about it.
And it's fun that it's an more East Coast one because it seems like people were wanting that. There's a lot of East Coast options in the poll. I think, except for 2 of them, there's one more West and then the Texas one. And then the rest are more East Coasty. So that's fun too.
Man, Asheville, North Carolina is
Pulling
mopping up
away?
at the
Okay, I
moment.
want to look.
Yeah.
I was going to try to wait, but now I want to look.
All right, we won't refresh it too often. I mean, it's only 3 votes
fun.
ahead of Williamsburg, so maybe that's not exactly a wild slam dunk here.
Okay, yeah. Poor Ketchum. Ketchum's in last place right now.
Come on, Ketchum, catch up, buddy. I'm rooting for. I would be so delighted if Ketchum won.
Yeah,
Like,
that's the Western one, the far West one.
yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to go to Idaho like that.
Damn, if we went to Gloucester, I already forget how to say it. That's so close to where I am. That's probably like a 2-hour flight. That'd be sick.
Oh, that'd be interesting. I might
Yeah.
as well just keep it rolling and go up to Halifax at that point.
Oh, that'd be fun. You guys would love Halifax, especially
I
this
know.
time of year. It's so nice here right now.
I know I would.
Mm-hmm.
But let's see. We haven't really talked about Dungeons and Dragons too much. I guess we did on the main show. But I want to thank everybody for the nice feedback about that. Obviously, huge shout out to Charles Hart
He
for
was so
killing
good.
it.
He's such
Oh
a
my
good
God.
DM.
Jesus, yeah, it was crazy. And like the turnaround blew my mind how he was able to wrangle all that stuff together. Shout out to my friend Nora who trained me up and gave me a D&D handbook and stuff going into the whole thing. She was a huge help as well and an expert on the Dungeons and Dragons front.
Sarah was really great at subtly integrating the rules back into how y'all were imagining scenarios too. It's like reminding you, like, oh, remember you have, but saying it in character, so it felt like it was part of the story instead of just like, Ben, remember you have X spell. She was like, but what about your spell? Like, I thought she did a really good job at that too.
Yeah, it was funny, like seeing everybody's different approach of like, okay, I would veer things towards chaos, silly town, but it was nice to have Sarah there. And she was so focused on like the mystery and the puzzle that Charles was setting up, you know, like she was just like laser focused on like, you know, her just being like, well, we have to save the town. I'm like, who cares about saving a town? But just her having that perspective of like, no, this is what you do in D&D. It's like, oh, okay, sure. I guess we can care about the town. What a weird idea.
That's what I was talking to Charles about when he was on Bonus Pod a little while ago. It's like, what if you come up with this awesome story and they walk up to the town and they just go, let's go back to where we just were. You know what I mean? What if they just ignore it? He's like, lost opportunity. You just have to let the player do what they want to do. But not going to lie, it hurts when they walk around a really cool crafted experience that you had ready for them to go. But it would just be so the antithesis of the point of D&D to be like, no, you have to go in this town right now. Too bad. You go into town.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, and he pivoted so much, like even with the goblin out of the gate, the fact that we knew exactly what was going on with the town. But that was that weird thing of like, the goblin told us what was going on, that everyone was in disguise. But then my perception check was always low in the town. So it'd be like, well, wait, do I know that this is a goblin in disguise or not? Because I'm looking at this goblin in disguise and my perception check is so low. So I had a tough time being like,
Did your character
Oh,
just
hang on, Dan.
forget that thing that you just learned a second
Right.
ago? Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't figure that out. Of like, okay, I want Sarah. I want to communicate to Sarah that I'm not forgetting that these are goblins. That it's my character forgetting that these are goblins because the perception check is so low. It's like that type of stuff was really fun. That I'm curious how like D&D masters would handle it. But it is. I'm used to people being way too nice about min-max and the podcast and all that stuff, and just being very sweet with feedback. It's a very nice community. Something was different about people complimenting like moments in that D&D stream. It just felt like it's the equivalent of if you were like, being silly and making characters with your sister and just messing around, Haley, but then having just like a wave of feedback from people who were acting like they were real people. You know what I mean? Like, here's my little example: is multiple people were like, dude, when you made that key in your mouth and pulled it out as the great trick for how you got out of that locked cell, that was such an amazing moment. I'm like, amazing moment. That was me just saying something silly, but there's some weird extra weight where it's felt like it's some storyline that's happening on some level, and that just made it to be like some of the most flattering feedback possible when people enjoyed it.
Yeah, like I mean, the closest I've gotten to doing something like that is just honestly Leo and I's Red Dead roleplay streams where people have kind
Yes,
of reached out to
yes.
us and been like, "Oh, you're gonna get that stinky Bastille," which is like a whole. I could spend 2 hours explaining the lore of where Leo and I are right now. We got booed at our last show. We're calling out social injustices via our theater, anyways, and it does kind of feel like you. It's weird. And then Leo has that voice he does for his character Pelon. And when he's
Yeah.
Pelon, and we're not in a Discord call. It's like you're playing. It's weird. Your brain gets into a space where you're like, "This is my friend Pelon," and and you get really invested into it, and it's really fun. I can see the appeal of D&D because it's really just. I've talked to this about Leo a lot. It's just playing with your friends. It's like you're 10 years old again and you're playing. And oh my god, my adult brain craves that kind of fun interactivity and imagination stuff so much sometimes, especially with
Yeah.
work
No,
and life.
I'm totally with you. Like we had, what was it, last year? Where Leo and I did that stream where we're just like playing with Legos. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, this is a whole thing that I've missed from my childhood that I spent so much time doing. And D&D kind of has that feel.
Yeah.
So I loved it. I'm wary. Of course, like all things, I'm going to be the worrywart. But somebody commented like, you should do this every week. It's like, yes. I mean,
You were
we
very clear it
technically-
was a one shot, and yeah.
Right, right. And even like Sarah, who's maybe the most gung ho about that, it's like, that would be awesome. At the same time, a year and a half from now, how would we feel about that? I don't want to
Yeah.
lock anything like that into place and have us be burned out and learn to hate each other because of that. But I do think for like special events, I would be open to doing it in some way in the future. It'd be fun. But I wanted to call this out because I was editing it for clips, the whole D&D stream, and Leo had this moment at the end that is one of like my favorite lines. It's so stupid, but I watched it so many times where at the end when I was trying to disguise myself as the mayor and trying to impersonate his southern accent,
Yeah.
and Leo was like suddenly not impressed by my acting performance because he had to spoil the D&D campaign because he'd basically seen the face of God and realized that I wasn't a good actor after all. And he had this line where Leo goes, I'm not going to do his impersonation, his full voice of his character, but he goes, I'll be frank. After witnessing what I witnessed, which cannot be put into words, you are not doing a southern accent. And like that moment slayed me. I watched it so many times making that clip, and it just never ceased to crack me up for Leo's weird Cockney delivery of that stupid line.
That's amazing. And yeah, he was smart to lead into his act. I've seen a few. I listen to D&D campaigns on his podcast sometimes, and there's been a lot of like, it's a very tropey character to do the low intelligence barbarian style character. But when someone's good at that, it's so funny. Like, well, there was a few lines that he killed me. It was like, you guys saw writing on the wall. He's like, oh my god, who can read? Like, that kind of stuff is so good. It's like writing level for fantasy show level improv. It's great.
Yeah, it's perfect. But we have these community questions. Should we start diving through these kind of businessy ones?
Yeah, I wanted to tell you before we do that too. Guess what I started this weekend?
Ooh. Is it remake?
Yeah, I started remake this
Oh,
weekend. I'm like 4
is it
hours
only because you
in.
knew I was going to be on bonus pod
No, I've
today?
just I finished Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, so I like having a big chunky RPG to play at bedtime, like
Yeah.
just incrementally play a couple hours a night. So I missed that because I did 7 and then 8, and now it's just like I have a bunch of other little things I could play, but I just sometimes I just want to grind and do mundane shit in a RPG world and make the map clean, like that kind of stuff. I don't know why it
Yep.
relaxes me at bedtime, but yeah, I'm 4 hours in. I love the combat system. It's so good.
Ooh. Okay. Good. 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 You're sitting pretty then. If that's clicking with you.
It is clicking. I really didn't know. I guess I just never really looked into it that much. Like, how does combat actually work in those games?
Right.
And I'm not that far in, but just even the introductory stuff with Barrett and like, oh, he's for when I want to do distance stuff. Oh, if I do this when I'm too close, it's too slow, blah, blah, blah. Learning what's good combos, what's bad combos. And just spamming square is always going to feel good to do stuff. Like that in
Okay.
combination with the strategy that it actually does offer
Yes.
outside of just spam square has really been interesting to me.
Yeah. That's the amazing part is like having the action feel so good, but then just pausing it. And the part that kills me is I feel like most games, if they had this structure for combat, they would just pause it straight up. But I love the fact it doesn't pause it; it just goes super, super slow motion.
Yeah.
So you still get like this super dynamic look of everything that's happening. And my favorite is just the particle effects. Because every time you pause it, there's usually like some sparks flying somewhere, just like grazing over Cloud's face, or some magic
Cool.
being cast slowly in the distance. It's so damn good. And definitely Remakes combat has some weaknesses that Rebirth fills in, like ranged enemies in Remake get a little bit annoying of like, here's a flying enemy. You have Tifa. What the hell are you supposed to do here?
Yeah.
I can pop my magic or maybe kind of wedge my way up there and do some attacks, but that's awesome. I'm so glad you're starting that thing. And like, open world checklist stuff, that's very much Rebirth's game. Remake is
More
honestly,
story.
yeah, I would just fly through Remake. The side quests are kind of blah.
Save it for Rebirth. Save that energy
I
for
think
Rebirth.
so.
I kind of did that with
Yep.
Like a Dragon too. Like a Dragon 7, I didn't do nearly as much side stuff. I platinumed 8. Like I did absolutely everything, and then I was 2 trophies away from the platinum anyways. So I was like, I might as well just platinum this. Like it's just a fun thing to do. But one of the trophies is just getting Ichiban to level 70, that was just the only thing. All I did was just grind and listen to YouTube and for a few nights straight. But I liked doing that because I knew 8 was the one I really wanted to know more about, but I was just using 7 as a launch point to get more into 8. So I didn't mind just
Right.
playing 7 and learning all the characters, doing some side content, not all, and then moving on. And then doing every little thing I could possibly do in 8 to the point that it like every Sujimon, like maxed out every Sujimon thing, did
Oh
every
my
little mini
god.
game, all of the personality traits are maxed out, all that nonsense. Because I could talk about that game a lot, but I love those characters so much. The writing's
That's
so
so good.
good.
I'm really looking forward to getting back into Infinite Wealth. I feel like now I'm ready to dive back into that, and especially I feel like it's a great PlayStation Portal game.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
That's how I
There's
played it.
a
What are you looking at?
there's a bumblebee on my
Oh,
window that's the size of a dragon.
I
I've
can
never
hear it
seen a bigger
actually.
bumblebee in my life. No, you can't. It's not flying. It's probably just my computer that you're hearing.
Oh, maybe.
It's an
Computers do
obnoxious
kind of
loud
sound like
laptop.
bumblebees.
Be bizarre.
I have a
Um,
very irrational fear of bumblebees and wasps. I will run. Like I will run and be annoying and scream and I hate it about myself and it makes me embarrassed, but I can't stand I'm just so scared of them.
but bumblebees are like the cute ones. Can they even sting you?
They
Bumblebees?
can. They can. I'm just
Okay.
like it's wasps are assholes, right? Like
Yep.
death
Yep.
to wasps. Anyone will agree. Bumblebees are cute and they don't want to sting you because they'll die too and all that stuff. But just in the moment, they sound too alike. You don't know where they're coming from. They bump it. You feel their little chunky bodies bump into you. You think they're planning an attack. And my friend
Oh.
Michael and I always joked that I was gonna have never been stung on my gravestone because I had never been stung. But then I got stung. I was sitting down the waterfront in my city having drinks and wasps love hanging out near beers and nachos and stuff and there was just like a hornet's nest or something nearby and it stung me in the arm, and I was like, no. And Michael happened to be with me. He's like, you're a gravestone. I was like, no.
I think everyone else around you just thinks you're deathly allergic if you're screaming about your gravestones. You guys
Probably. But yeah,
Yeesh.
I appreciate that bumblebees aren't. It's like people who are scared of, like what's it called, trachophobia, like scared of holes. It's like Swiss cheese freaks them out. It's irrational.
Really?
I don't know. I know it's dumb to be scared. I can't help it. I'm just scared.
Weird. Rate this on the depression meter. I was just like going on a walk with my wife, and we were by a cemetery or something, and I was like, I was thinking, I think would be nice on my tombstone, which I don't want, to be clear. I don't want to be buried in a weird cemetery. No offense to everyone buried in a weird cemetery. Don't come at me, skeletons.
I also don't want to be buried, even though I talk about a tombstone. That's a weird thing. Yeah.
Yeah, we just want a temporary tombstone for fun, and then you can throw that away.
Yeah.
But I was like, I think a nice message for my tombstone is just, he tried for a little while.
That's nice.
And my wife is like, that's the saddest, most depressing thing I've ever heard in my life. I'm like, what do you mean? That's like everything. It's just, that's the most you can say about a life.
That's
It's
every human being ever.
Yeah, I gave it a whirl for a little while, and you can read that in multiple different ways, but I thought that was a nice message, and she's like, absolutely not. That's too much of a bummer.
I always am weirded out when I walk by graveyards. It's just like, there's so many skeletons in there. Like, how am I supposed to be? I'm walking to school or something, and I gotta walk past 10,000 skeletons? Huh?
Yep,
And that's
like
just a normal day?
If you had Superman X-ray vision or whatever,
Oh.
it'd be so weird. Like the Batman detective vision, but you could just see all the skeletons in there. How have they not done that? Is there a cemetery in Gotham in that game, and you can see skeletons in there?
Missed opportunity.
it.
I don't know how they
Yeah,
haven't
come
done
on.
that.
We have so many smart businessy questions that I really appreciated. Should we jump into these
talking about our
suckers?
dirty gravestones, or should we move on to business questions?
Yeah, I don't want to be buried in a cemetery, but I want to have a coffin in a cemetery that's just filled with bumblebees. So if there's any grave robbers, they'll have quite the fright.
Just they'll open it, just dead bees.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's gonna be some great trap. It's just the lamest thing possible. Bunch of corpses.
That's funny.
I'm gonna have to sell my house and move. This
Is he
insect is
inside?
too big.
He's
He's outside.
Oh, okay. Then I
But-
definitely didn't hear him before. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope not. I hope there's it's not.
Oh,
a
he's really
raptor or
confused.
velociraptor
He's trying to come
situation.
in.
I guess so. Okay, so we had Tom G. Do you want to? Well, I guess I curated my own list, so I can't have you read it. So I'm sorry
Okay.
to steal more of the show away from you.
I could, if you tell me Tom G, I could just read Tom G's one.
Oh yeah, please do. Tom G has a good one.
Do you have any short-term and long-term growth goals for MinMax? How do you/will you measure that? I.e., number of patrons, number of full-time cohorts. Bonus question. I can ask you after you answer that one, maybe.
The bonus question I don't have a great answer for, so I'm happy to get to it right now. But just
Oh yeah.
bonus question is, what's the average membership period / length on Patreon? I don't know. I don't know if they have easy stats for that. That'd be interesting. Let me go to the analytics on Patreon right now to see if there is something there.
Haven't you said before
I
that
don't-
the analytics is kind of lacking on Patreon? Like they don't really give you as much.
They don't give
data
you
as they really
any-
should.
No. They overhauled it recently, but they're not able to track like audio listens for the Patreon exclusive podcasts and stuff like that, which would be really helpful to have a
Would be
sense
good to
of.
know.
Yeah, they overhauled it so I can see like, okay, over the last 30 days, here's where activity is moving. Like we had 150 people upgrade their tier and 202 people downgrade their tier, like those types of things, which is interesting to see. But the question of, yes, short-term and long-term growth goals for MinMax. Growth goals is an interesting way to phrase it, not like strategy goals or anything. Long-term, it's always just sustainability. How can we be smaller, smarter, more sustainable as an outlet? Stick around, hopefully treat people well that are in the system and all that fun stuff to feel like we're still beating the system by MinMax existing. And that's the way I feel quite often, is like, God, this shouldn't work as well as it does. This is ridiculous that this is still like a system that is sailing across the ocean, and that people can jump in on Patreon and support an independent outlet like this, and that just lets us pump out as much content as a lot of other outlets out there, which is really cool to see.
Yeah.
The short-term stuff, we could use a boost on YouTube. I do feel like I'm blown away by the level of support we have on Patreon, especially when people look at like the size of like our YouTube audience, which is a fraction of a lot of other kind of
I see
sister
that
outlets
comment a
out there.
lot. Like, how does this have only this many views? How is this only have this many subscribers on this channel? That's
Right.
crazy. I see that a lot.
Right. Yeah, it is interesting. Just, these people are like, oh, this is way off. This should have millions of views. And that's very flattering. At the same time, I think that like I'm not trying to put us down, but I feel like and on the internet, by and large, I feel like the water finds its level. And like all the stuff I was doing at Game Informer was around this level of popularity as well, I suppose. That had like the cover story stuff that could really boost the numbers every once in a while.
Yeah.
But like, no, I think this feels about right for like the level of content that we're doing. It's, I don't know, averaging what, 13,000 views maybe on YouTube for every episode of the MinMax show, which is awesome. But it's like, it's a 2.5 hour podcast on YouTube every week. Like, I feel super fortunate that there's that many people that are interested in it and finding it. I'm not saying that we should throw in the towel on YouTube. I just feel like, I don't think there's some great injustice numbers wise happening by us not being bigger on YouTube. That being said, I personally would love to grow on YouTube, and maybe this is gross or whatever, but I think that like so many publishers, when they're reaching out to folks for like preview opportunities, stuff like that, like naturally they would look at YouTube subscribers. And even though traffic wise, I think we do pretty well compared to like a lot of our sister outlets out there, like subscriber wise, we have like, 1/6 the numbers of subscribers.
Yeah.
Which means that our subscribers are more engaged, which I think is more valuable in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And there's less just random people saying mean comments on YouTube, perhaps because of that. But at the same time, I do think like, are we missing out on cool opportunities and potential interviews, stuff like that, by people just seeing that YouTube number and being like, well, it's not that big, which I think it's like 48,000 subscribers right now.
And what also is not getting thought there by those publishers is all the audio listeners that's data they can't see. They can't look at the number of people that just listened on Apple Podcasts to the which those numbers
and so
different too.
Yeah, and so I've talked a little bit about it before, but like a GDC tried kind of making the rounds with PR folks to kind of give updates on
Is that bee still
MinMax's. Yeah, it is. I don't care for it. It's really freaking me out. But so I went around and kind of gave an update on our analytics, and I made like a fancy little media deck that like breaks down MinMax's analytics. None of your personal data, don't be alarmed, but just kind of like, hey, at this point we have, I think, over 11 million views on YouTube. Like monthly podcast downloads are, if you include everything, like YouTube, which is kind of fudging it, but we got to factor that in. So YouTube and the main podcast feed and the Patreon podcast feed, we're at about 36. Twitch. Well, yeah, Twitch is, it's a confusing thing, but it's like, we're around 36,000 for an audience every week of the MinMax show. And so what the math is, like, I think monthly downloads would be like 175,000 over that, I suppose. Mm-hmm. So just trying to like share those numbers out there to be like, I think we're doing really well. These numbers aren't lying. Please give us codes if we want a code to play your game, type of thing.
Yeah.
So trying to message that out there with folks is something that we can work on. And to be honest, I think it's been a while since I've made a YouTube video where I'm like, I think this can really blow up on YouTube. And I think that's gross to try and chase that. But I think I should factor that in when I have some downtime and I'm looking at a sea of options for what little one-off video to make. It's like, maybe I should steer it towards a thing that has a chance of blowing up on YouTube.
I don't think that's gross. I think that's online content creation. I think no one would fault you for that.
Yeah. So, we'll see what exactly that looks like in the future. But I would love to get those YouTube numbers up a little bit, because I do worry about, and this almost feels like a Xbox Microsoft conversation, so steer me back if it gets too weird. But like, I worry about our community being saturated, which is awesome. Like, we have a really engaged community. It's fantastic. But I feel like if we're not constantly expanding on YouTube and finding a new audience, I feel like at some point we're going to get completely stagnant, and everybody who wants to jump in and support us on Patreon has, and maybe they were there for a couple of months and left, whatever. But at a certain point, are we just recycling those people, trying to get them back in the system? And so, a good combo for us is doing those code giveaways. I don't know if people in the community have noticed that much, but especially for like the deepest dive on Rebirth, it's like, hey, we're doing the deepest dive on Rebirth. If you jump in and support us this week, we'll give you a code for Thirsty Suitors on Steam. Or just recently for the D&D campaign, we partnered it with codes on Steam if you unlock the bonus podcast feed for Undermine or for Dice Folk. And I really love that system of doing code giveaways. I'm going to get back to the positive in a second, but the interesting downside is like when we do those code giveaways, like we did it for Dice Folk and Undermine, and they're not the biggest games in the world, but they're good games. Like Undermine in particular, I really, really love. And Jeffem's playing Dice Folk now, and he's really enjoying it. But it's like, okay, not that many people are jumping in just for those codes. So at that point, is everybody who could possibly be persuaded to jump in on Patreon because of a code, have they all been hit? Or is it just that we just need to keep surfing around and find the right game to potentially lure people in? Which sounds weird when you put it that way, but that's the idea. Is like, I think it's a nice boost of like, hey, you unlock the podcast version of this D&D campaign, you support independent games media, and we'll DM you a Patreon or a Steam code. I feel like that put a lot of people over the edge for the deepest dive partnerships if we find the right game to partner up with those. And just, full transparency for all those code giveaways. There's no money exchanging hands for those. They're partnerships more than sponsorships, I suppose. But it's a really, I think, a nice system just to like reach out to these publishers or people working on the indie game, be like, hey, do you have a pile of Steam codes sitting there? Would you like some free promotion? Like, we'll promote on social, on the MinMax show, all these places, and just if you're up for giving us potentially hundreds of Steam codes, and we'll return a bulk of them because they're probably not all going to be used. I feel like it's a nice win-win, and when it really works and people jump in, it's amazing. Like, we did a code giveaway for Star Ocean 2, the remake of that, along with the Game Awards reaction stream last December. And that was huge for us. Like, so many people jumped in for that. Like, I think we got maybe like 200 people jumping in on Patreon because of that, which, wow. I mean, that, if you could just have that every couple months or have like a deepest dive on Rebirth with that code giveaway, it's like, oh my God, like we would be growing ass over tea kettle, if that's a phrase.
Classic Minnesotan phrase? Question mark.
there's some phrase like that. So like those types of things work really well, but it's not. It also depends on us finding a new audience on YouTube and always expanding and finding new folks and always shifting around to different games, all that fun stuff.
Do you ever consider doing like ads, like social media ads, whether that's Instagram ads, Facebook ads, TikTok ads? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, not too many people are reaching out about that. We have had people who are like, hey, can we pay you to play this game? And even if the game seems okay, I've turned down all of them. Like, at this point, I don't want to get fully into like the pay to play
or not
stuff.
Even like that stuff, because I can get how that's icky, but just like, those little clippy trailers you put at the end of content, or even like the one that's on our Twitch page when no one's going live, like something akin to that's just maybe tied to the hottest topic right now, and then it's short blurb about MinMax at the end of it, and then that's just an ad that runs on TikTok or even Etsy, and like those other random websites have a lot of random traffic flow. And I know that the thought is like, well, no one clicks those, blah blah blah, but you might find new users that way.
Right. Yeah. We did Facebook boosts a while ago to kind of get MinMax out there a little bit, and I just feel like no one's seeing this stuff. Like, for trying to, I think the best way we can, other than like a hit YouTube video, the best way to get MinMax out there is like us guesting on other podcasts, which is free and fun. And so I'd love to, line up more of those opportunities. I think that's a nice way to get us out there. It's always nice.
Those users are interested in the type of content you're creating anyways, because they're watching that other collaboration content.
Right. And so many folks that like, we message on Patreon for the new supporters. And we ask how they found us. It's like, oh, you were on an episode of Easy Allies back in 2018 and I followed you from there. Or you were on Triple Click and I followed you from there. Or, a big one is like, oh, I loved listening to Janet and Kind of Funny, so I found you at MinMax. Like just those guest spots, or just kind of the cross pollination of the game world, the game podcasting world is a big one. But on the sponsorship front, on we should talk about that a little bit. Is like talking about Trivia Tower being sponsored. I'm in terms of like short-term goals. I am looking for more of those, what I would consider the slam dunk sponsorships, which can be tricky, I think, when it's that stuff of like, hey, how about we pay you to play our game that just came out? It's like, sure, maybe. I would never rule it out 100%, but right now I don't like the feel of that. But
There's
I do think
also
there
a
are
certain
like
type of game that offers those kind of promotions, and you know what I mean? It's
yeah,
like
yeah. So those would definitely be a no. But if there's some game that's like, well, we like this game anyway, like I don't want to fully rule it out, but right now it's like I don't like that too much. But there are just like slam dunk sponsorship opportunities where it's like, oh yeah, this is an easy win-win. Of course we should do something like this. Like an easy one was BAFTA reached out, but like, hey, can we pay you to do like a sponsored stream, a reaction stream for the BAFTA Game Awards? And I was like, yeah, like what's the harm in that? Like our community would like to watch it. That seems great.
yeah.
And so there are those types of things. One too is if there's like a port of an old game coming to a new system or something. Sometimes we'll talk to folks about maybe sponsoring content there, where it's like, yeah, it's not going to be a conflict for the 210s when we talk about this if it's a port of a game that we liked in the past. So those types of things are, emails that I'm sending out on a pretty regular basis of like, hey, do you want to sponsor Trivia Tower? Or like, hey, hardware is huge, like food, which is dumb, but like I reached out to like Jack Link's Jerky. Be like, hey, you're a Minnesota-based company. This makes sense. Like gamers like jerky. I like jerky. So those types of things. Like, hey, do you want to sponsor Trivia Tower? Like those basic ideas. That's something that we got rolling out there.
Yeah.
Let's see. More questions. Ooh, Rito has one that you can answer, Haley.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'll read it. I thought you were gonna read it.
No, I'll let you take it.
Where is it? Redo. Oh, here we go. Is there any lawyerly advice current Haley can give that would have changed one of past Ben's decisions? This is the spirit of getting better relating to small business, game media outlet, taxes, etc. I don't know anything about taxes. I always tell my clients that. They go, what do you think I should do? I'm like, don't know. Get an accountant. That's not what I deal with. It always crosses with all the kind of work that I do. I don't know. I mean, you have an LLC. It's all set up properly. Everything's structured right. I honestly think business side, you're probably fine. That's the kind of stuff I do, right? Like, I think maybe this question might think like I might have more strategy advice for growth of companies, but I don't have that. I just have the advice for like if Ben wanted to change his company from an LLC to an S corp, what does he file? Like, I can help with those kind of things, but no, I mean, as long as you have your company shell and you're putting all your stuff into it and you're contracting with that to other parties, that's pretty much most of the stuff I deal with. LLC
That's how it works. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I did, when we have the contractors at MinMax like sign contracts. I guess that makes sense. On a regular basis and all this stuff. And when I sent Haley the contract for the first time, I was like, oh, she's going to tear it to shreds. So I'm like, hey, could you, like, if there is any wording in here that you think we should tweak for the future, please let me know. Because it's kind of like a boilerplate contract in a lot of ways. And you had like 8 pieces of very good advice. Like, I changed this wording. This is confusing here, but I don't think I instituted those changes. And so I apologize.
And then I
for
signed
that
it as is. So it's kind of
I know. It's not like it was anything shady. It was just like, I forget what, do you remember any of the specifics of like this wording here is weird?
It's just like certain ways you can, independent contractor agreements are pretty boilerplate anyways. Like we have a template we use at my firm, and largely it's just like using the template, explaining how it works, tweaking it for their specific company, and then adding certain provisions or removing certain ones if they need them, don't need them. And then video game clients specifically, I have a few extra provisions I always include with them because it just tends to come up more like the personality right waiver, because a lot of times it's like, and as a composer we have blank, and you want to be able to say their name or like show off that someone specific's working on your game, and you have to specifically get the right to use people's name when you're doing that kind of promotional stuff.
Okay.
No AI, so like you're not allowed to use AI or plug any of the work you're making for the company into AI databases. That's one that people keep asking for. What are the other ones? A license to be able to use the game products they make on their website or social media for promotional purposes only, because that's just friendly, right? It's like if you have a really good artist working for you, you want them to say, "And I worked on this game, and I'm posting about it on Twitter." Like unless you give them that
Yeah.
license, they're not allowed to do that. But the one you sent me, I mean, we could probably find our
Yeah.
conversation
Yeah.
from forever
Whatever.
ago. It's just, like, oh, this is a bit not clear. I could read it as this. This is. I think everything I poked at was like in my benefit. It was like I was trying to
Well, yeah.
strengthen the agreement to be worse for me to sign as the contractor from company's perspective. But
Yeah.
it was
I'm
a
trying to
fine
think of like,
boilerplate. It was fine. I'm just
it's
picky.
fine. Yeah. No, I'm trying to think of like, yeah, what would be like potential sticky issues there. I think one of them is like any IP made under this contract is owned by MinMax. I think that's in the contract. So it's
Yep.
like, I don't know what the hell the equivalent would be. Kelsey can't take the show of. Well, Kelsey's kind of a weird example, I suppose. Like she has her own YouTube channel, but like could just like take a new show plus show and be like, all right, this is on my YouTube channel. But
Reposted on her channel, yeah.
it's the type of thing of like that's in the contract technically. But if someone's like, I really want to leave MinMax and I want to take spiciest interview with me or something, I'd be like, yeah, sure. Like it's not like it'd be a weird battle for something like that. But
That's
who
so
knows?
standard. If you're working for a company and making stuff for them, the company owns it. Like regardless of if you're an employee or contractor, that's pretty standard. It's
Yeah.
only if like sometimes there's mess in if you have personal projects and then you start using that stuff to make stuff at work, and then your job can try to argue that they own your personal
Right.
projects now, or you work on it during your work hours. You're working on personal projects at your office where you're not supposed to be. We see a lot of problems like that sometimes with the big AAA studios being like, "Oh, that's kind of good. That's ours now because you worked on it at work," trying to
Yep.
snag up the IP.
Yep. 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 Do you want to read Grizzled Gaming's question over there?
Sure. Grizzled Gaming. Let me find it here. Not looking for specific numbers, obviously, but I've been curious how the pay structure works at MinMax. Are the cohorts on a per appearance deal with a minimum number of appearances guaranteed, or is it a flat monthly rate? Ben's playing with the dinosaur audio listeners.
Please, this is a serious business conversation, Haley.
Ben doesn't pay us; he just does puppet shows for us and calls with his dinosaurs. With Ben being the only full-time person, does he have a set salary? How do things like paternity work leave when the cohort is gone for a while? Pretty much,
Oh boy.
yeah. That's a lot of questions, especially when you're dealing with contractors, right? Which is so sometimes people get confused and think that it's kind of like being an employee when you work as an independent contractor for somebody, but it's very different. There's way less onus and responsibility on the person contracting you to do all that extra stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I realize I've done this twice now, so forgive me. Grizzle Gaming also has something that I'd love to. He says, "I'd also love to hear thoughts about the new studio setup, as I don't think it's been publicly discussed." That's true. So normally, I would love to do like, here's the behind the scenes look at building the new studio and stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm so sensitive about this, and the fact that it's like the house, and it's always like that push and pull of like prioritizing family versus prioritizing min-max workspace that like I emotionally could not handle.
Just
If
let,
people
let
saw
it
like,
be your new house. Let it be your new house. That's yours
well,
and
no,
cozy. And we don't
well,
need to see it.
yes, no. But I just like I want to make sure it looks good before I'm like, this is the new min-max studio. Because
Gotcha.
if it's like work in progress, and everyone's like, that looks like shit. It's like, okay, well, yeah, I know. It's just so I'm gonna. Like I said, a couple months before the new min-max studio is up and running there, and
Are you gonna
it
do a
doesn't
little
look
ribbon cutting
like.
ceremony?
Oh, that's
That'd be cute.
interesting. Could be. For a tease of the direction of the new studio is might be getting a new table. And then also like for the last two studios, it's one of those obvious things that you look at, it's like, wait, what the hell? Is they don't feel very on brand for min-max, if you know what I mean. For like, Jeff Wiggins, our graphic designer, did such a good job laying out like the brand style guide for min-max for like these are the min-max colors and logos and all that stuff. And the studios have not adhered to that. So the new space, it's going to be hopefully more in line with a min-max brand look while still feeling cozy. Is kind of the pitch for where we're going with the new studio.
That would probably help with the cross promotional stuff, because then you can tell by looking like, oh, min-max content, as opposed to learning about it just via word of mouth.
I guess so. Yeah. But other questions, Grizzle Gaming. Yes. So how the pay structure works at MinMax. So are the cohorts, let's go through all these questions one by one. Are the cohorts on a per appearance deal with a minimum number of appearances guaranteed, or is it a flat monthly rate? It is a little bit of everything. So we have a couple of options for folks. They can either be paid hourly, the contractors, or if you want the flat monthly rate, that's also an option. And it's interesting, like what people prefer. Some people want that very clean system of like more time I put in, more money I get out. That makes sense completely. Other people are like, well, I'm trying to budget my life and I can't have some months where I get very little and some months where I get way too much. And so at that point, how about you just average that out and then give me that much for a flat rate every month. And so people choose which way to go between those things. I know, Haley, I know we've talked a little bit behind the scenes of like you trying to decide which way to go and which way is better. It's kind of everything's emotionally complicated trying to navigate like what's fair.
It's like a per person thing, right? But it's hard, but then you have 10 people who are all working at the same place.
Right. Yeah. So it's an odd one. But that's the structure, and everybody just kind of has to find their own thing. So there's no minimum number of appearances per month necessarily. If someone was like, this hasn't happened, right? But if someone was like, yeah, I'll take the flat rate. Also, I don't want to do anything for a couple months. Maybe something's up here. But it's like, it's so weird. You can probably see it, especially New Show Plus, when like streaks happen. There are some months where there's a lot of certain people and other months where it's like, oh, we're kind of going light on Jacob and Kelsey for this 2-month period. And other months it's all Jacob all the time. And so it's tough to try and find that right balance for everybody, but there's no set requirement. It's all just kind of ballpark. Don't be a dick. Basic rules here. Paternity leave. I guess Jeffham's the only one who's done this, but he's done it twice now. But yeah, so that would be, he gets his full amount. It's like the same as like a business paternity leave, right?
Yeah.
As
I
if
would
he
imagine
was.
That's employment standards anyways, right? Like that's not something you're granting. That's just the minimum employment standards.
Is it? I don't even know. I thought I was being a nice guy, but am I secretly just doing what the government expects of me?
I guess it depends if he's an employee or
a
contractor, which I technically don't know.
Right. I guess he would be contractor.
Yeah.
But still.
Then you don't have any minimum standards, and you're just a really nice guy, Ben.
Oh, thank God. Thank God. Yeah. So that should be it. Yeah. How do things like, how does it work if a cohort is out for a while? Yeah, that's the thing. I don't think it's come up, but if somebody was out for a couple weeks, I feel like people have been pretty good about like, oh, I'm on a fixed rate, but I'm out on a vacation period for 2 weeks, so maybe the other 2 weeks I can volunteer for more New Show Pluses or whatever. It's pretty loose, and I think it's working out okay. But I am obviously having a limited perspective on that. But I mean, Haley, it's always tough to figure out how much to go behind the scenes here. But like, you're on a fixed rate. And you're in that camp of like, oh, well, should I go hourly? Maybe it makes sense. We talked about maybe shifting things over, but then you're like, but then I like to do these bonus Weird Nancy Drew streams, but I don't think
like
you could afford to. Yeah, and like, I'm not going to pay that much money for those.
I would feel gross taking that. I know people are saying, Haley, make money for it. But no, it's different. It hits different. It's different than me planning out a bonus pod, organizing guests, thinking of the topics beforehand, writing out the post, blah, 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 versus I'm buzzed one weekend night and I played Nancy Drew for 5 hours. Should I get paid the same rate for those two things? And then we have to think about what's the difference in rate? How do we categorize the rate? Is it based on what I'm streaming and how stupid it is? Like that's also like, it's weird. I don't know.
It'd be weird for me to be like, no, don't do that thing that you want to do.
That creates
that's fun
content.
And the community would like, because we can't afford it. And so but then again, we don't want to do that. Have you doing that content for free? And so, there's also the big picture stuff, I suppose. I don't know if we've ever gone too much into this, but whoever's running the stream, they get 200% of every sub that goes in if they're running the stream. Except for when I'm running the stream, that just goes in the min-max pile. The rate to the min-max bank. But, it's one of those things that's kind of a weird thing to message of like, this money would go to me if you sub right now, but just if you're behind the scenes with this deep into a bonus pod, that's how it works. If you're curious.
Yeah.
So even though you're not being paid to those Nancy Drew streams necessarily, you're still paid from the subs that come in as you're doing them.
And I would have done that on my personal channel anyways. I'm just like, I might as well do it on MinMax, and then There you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
Uh, let's see. Patrick wrote in over here. They say, going off of Grizzle Gaming's questions, as the owner of MinMax, how hard is it to know what your personal take-home pay should be versus what is invested back into the company for stuff? Is running MinMax more lucrative than any of your previous jobs? I don't want the actual figures here. Just curious to know, since I hope the level of effort you're putting in is lucrative enough for you. That's very sweet. See how nice people are in the
They're
community?
like, Ben,
Haley?
are
It's
you
too
paying
much.
yourself enough? Make sure you pay
Yeah,
yourself. Give yourself a big bonus, Ben.
that's very nice. I've never given myself a bonus, which is nice. But yes. So let's see. I'm trying to remember if there's another question that deals with this. No. So yes, I have a set salary for myself, but that has been a huge surprise and a huge stressor, is trying to navigate your own worth when we've always been really lucky at MinMax, where we're always trying to ride it so that we're always in the black. We always have extra coming in every month so we can afford stuff like trips and afford stuff like Haley getting a new PC and stuff like that, just to have that build up over time. But that's really a weird feeling, and it's really been an emotional thing to try and navigate over the years of just like, how much am I worth? There's this money out there, but you feel like an asshole being like, I'm worth this much. Give me this much extra money. And so I think the cleanest way is just to have the set salary, and then try and move that accordingly. But yeah, I mean, is it more lucrative than stuff in the past? I try to base my salary on like,
Fair market
if there's
value
any
of
point
your
of compare,
services.
it's a really tough thing, but like
Yeah.
video producer in Minnesota, that
Yeah.
type of thing. But it's like, if I was still at Game Informer, maybe I'd be probably at this salary that I set myself at. But like when we started out, I mean, when I left Game Informer in 2019, I was making 63,000 a year, I believe, as the video producer there. And then when I started MinMax, I was like, well, I need to play it safe, and so I put my salary at 50,000. And so for the first couple years, I was below what I was making at Game Informer, and it was a weird thing of like talking to some folks that I trust, of just like trying to get a gauge. It's the weirdest thing, but like genuinely over lunch a couple times, I'm like,
What do you pay
I
yourself?
have no sense.
Please tell me.
Well, that's the question. Is like, no, like we're talking to people, not even to the other people, but like I say to them, like, how much should I pay myself? Can you help me set
Yeah.
this level? And there's it's a really weird thing to try and navigate, to try and figure out how much am I worth for doing this much work in Minnesota. I want to see myself just as like a video producer instead of like CEO or some nonsense like that. But like, okay, doing this level of work in Minnesota, it's stuff I like, blah, 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 blah. So yes, I think I'm making about as much as I would if I was still at Game Informer.
Are you
is
an employee
probably
of the LLC? Or you're a contractor?
No, I don't think I'm either. I think I'm just the full owner of the LLC, right?
Well, then probably you're an employee because you're. If it's,
I guess so.
it can exist naturally even if you don't have an agreement with yourself, if you're working in an employment styled way with the LLC.
Right. Someone's asking, do I measure my own hours? No, I don't. I've never done that. There's definitely some weeks where it's been a lot extra, and then some weeks where it's like, Friday I like took a 3-day weekend. It was no big deal. Yada yada. So it's like, it's always kind of a weird measurement to try and track that. But
That's what's nice about being your own boss, honestly, too. Is just that you know how much work you have to do this week, and you can, if you have to work till 10 one night, do it and sleep in the next day, whatever, as long as the work gets done.
It's the best. Yep, it's that basic idea for sure. But I did, do like, okay, what's our hourly rate? What's the number of hours versus my salary? And it's like, okay, I'm making quite a bit less than any of the contractors, but I think that's the way it should be. I'm the most spoiled in terms of just kind of the emotions of everyone sending nice messages every day and stuff, and technically being in charge. I feel like that seems fair. So yeah, that's the long and short of it. We got other. Let's see. Sean Mills writes in and says, when you have guests on the podcast like Jake Solomon, who are promoting a project like the new studio that he's working on, are you paying them to appear, or do they just agree to come on to get the word out about the projects? What is the process like to book a guest? Generally, no. That we do not pay guests like developers jumping on the podcast to talk about something like this. And so we pay recurring guests is kind of the framework we have right now. And it's an imperfect system, of course, but like, if people are coming on that are kind of that friend of the show territory, they are paid. But if it's like, hey, here's a one-off where Jake Solomon will jump on to talk about his game, his new studio, or like Lana jumping on from Riot to talk about animation, like, no, we don't pay those guests necessarily.
Yeah.
Chris says, I would have thought he would have paid to get the word out on his game. Well, that's kind of the fair trade. He's a smart guy. We're taking up his time. So I love a good win-win situation of he can talk about his studio on the podcast and we get to tap into the knowledge of the creative director for XCOM. That seems totally fair to me.
Yeah.
Do you want to keep going with these, Haley? Is this boring? Is this too geeky?
I mean, everyone in the Twitch chat is like, wow, this is so enlightening.
Good.
Should I check on the meetup and see where we're at?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Let's see.
Where are we at?
Asheville, still in the lead.
Wow, 47 votes. Second is Akron climbing up at 36. This is, at 34. This is close. Like, it seems like Asheville pulling away, but then again, it's like 10 more people.
Wow, already 310 votes.
That's awesome. And also I love that based on the number of votes, like people are being kind and not voting if they're not coming, because we sent it out to 4,500 people. So that's great to see.
Yeah.
Also, it's like, I guess it makes sense. Like Asheville is the most well-known name, I guess, out of all these.
I don't know as much about U.S. towns. Is that the most? Oh, Asheville! Like everyone knows where that is.
It's kind of a hip. It kind of feels like a new Austin. Of just kind of like, a hip, cool, smallish town. Okay. It's kind of been growing there. So, yeah. But hey, if you're watching this and you want to go to one of these cities, you're welcome to jump in on Patreon and make that vote happen before the end of the week here. Hazard asked, did Ben buy his house with specific thoughts about his studio space? And is there anything he's hoping to do with that space that previously couldn't be done in the old setup? Great question. Yes. Boy, howdy, did I look for a studio space when shopping houses, which you have your list of like things you want in a house as you're shopping around.
Did you tell your realtor that?
Yeah.
That's cool.
And then he followed us and he listened to the podcast once I mentioned what it was, and I was like, oh, you should check out our show, House Hunter Rise. And he didn't really understand what I was talking about, so that's fine. Yeah, so it's a tough thing to convey. Like, we need kind of like a big open room, separate from other stuff, where we could have a studio where we could podcast. So it's a weird thing to message, but in the list of priorities, there's so many that you want with your house, and so like adding onto that all it needs a min-max was super, super hard. Really, really hard. I want to emphasize that. But we found one where it's like, I can make this work. And so we're finishing off the basement to make it work even better than it could before.
You sent us some cool pictures of like possible layouts, and was getting our inputs too. And I like the where it ended up, the look of it. I think it's going to look cool. Okay.
That's great to hear. It's always that part of like, it feels a little bit like you complimenting this great role-playing moment in D&D where it's like, Haley, that was just a Photoshop. That's actually real.
It's gonna look just like that, and I'll be really disappointed if it's not.
I'll hope it looks like that. It's nice to have some image of like, we're going for this, and I think it's doable to have it look like that. Like we're already basically there.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, Philly Eat Steak, diving in the weeds. Does money from the Patreon go towards Ben's mortgage? I would expect it to, since it's where the studio is, but how does that work?
Well, this is the level salary, of good, right? Like your salary then goes to you're paying yourself your salary, then that goes to the mortgage.
That would, in kind of that indirect way, but that actually is a thing where it goes directly to it. And so the way this works is like when we moved out of the first apartment where the first MinMax studio was, I was moving in with my then girlfriend, now wife. And so it was a thing of like, well, if we were moving, we would just move into an apartment together. But because we needed studio space for MinMax, we need to rent a house, I guess, so we have space for it. Mm-hmm. So then it's like, well, how the hell do you do that? So basically we're like, okay, what's like the price of an apartment we would have rented versus the price of a house we're going to rent? What's that gap between them? MinMax should pay that much. So basically it's like it's basically like we're using the MinMax money to rent out a studio that is technically in my basement. And it's not a super expensive version of that. But so that is just that small slice that's going to be like the studio rental.
Yeah.
And then that is what we're carrying over into the new space as well. It's like, let's just keep that number the same for being that rough gap
And also the
to
power
account
that
for
goes
that.
towards turning, all the stuff you use every
Sure.
day. I had to deal with that with my taxes because I work from home entirely 100%. So when I do my taxes, I have to have the square footage of my office versus the square footage of my entire apartment. And then I can deduct my rent based on the square footage of my apartment based on that, which was nice. And I got like a really good
Ooh.
tax return this year because of that. So like a portion of my internet bill, a portion of my electricity, heat, all that kind of stuff. Because I work from home, it's technically office expenses because while I'm working, it's like I'm in my firm's office, but my firm's in Vancouver, so I have to work from home. And doing finding like it's a lot of work and it sucks in the moment, but getting that tax return after doing all that really annoying calculation and work is so nice
Yeah.
because it's money you're owed, right? Like that's the
Yeah.
government getting to keep all that while I pay my power bill when it should be deductible income. It just makes sense. So it sounds like you did similar stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the basic idea.
Yeah.
Let's see. Someone said, how involved was Sarah B with the studio design? She was the most vocal about the shortcomings of the old studio. I I feel like I bug Sarah so much about that. I'm like, Sarah, give me input. Sarah, give me input. What do you want? What do you want? What do you want? And she doesn't really have any much. She's just like,
She
just
did say
don't make it.
she doesn't like how we can't see each other at the table.
Yes. Yep. And
That
then
was
also
one
that
thing
the
I remember her
TV.
saying.
Yep. The TV should be a little bit higher. And so those are being factored in. And I sent her the rough Photoshop of what I had in mind. I think she said she liked it. But trust me, nothing was in my voice more than Sarah being disappointed when I was looking at different studio spaces in houses of like, would Sarah hate this? I think she would. So making her cozy is our number one mission at MinMax.
Perfect.
Kyle S., what's the current stance on merch? It doesn't seem like there's much of a push there anymore. I've never seen Patreons try seasonal stuff as like much as posters and shirts. You all seem to not have as much product design diversity as when you were starting up.
Oh.
That's true. We haven't. This merch stores are still available. There's several different ones out there. If you go to minmax.com/merch, you can find all that stuff. Crowboy asked, when was the last new shirt? It's been a little while. That is
one,
true.
maybe?
Ooh, yeah, probably that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a combo of a couple things. One of them is like the merch wasn't exactly flying off the shelves. I haven't found a merch store that I'm in love with in terms of print quality. Like the print quality for the current store is all right. If you wear the shirt for 4 years, it might be in a little bit of rough shape. And so I feel bad pushing it very hard unless I feel very confident about it. But it is an option there for folks who want that merch. I have plenty of MinMax merch shirts myself. They're fine. There's also the idea of, I think our cut for a lot of the merch, like if someone buys a t-shirt, I think we get like $2 from that. So it's like, well, what do you want to push? Do you want to push that $2 for the merch? Or do you want to try and reach out and find a new Patreon supporter for $2 a month? You know what I mean? So I feel like we're due for a new push on merch. Rich Bad at Games says, are you aware of how Something Rotten does it? He has a local independent supplier. I feel like that is the next step that we should do, is to improve the quality in a big way with that that angle.
My Something Rotten merch. The quality is really good.
Okay, great. I should definitely talk to him about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. Biscuits with Davey. Last question here. What are the specific milestones needed for MinMax to hire another person full-time, if at all? This is a good question. I know we've talked about it.
Can I tax onto this question? Were you
Please.
looking when I came on as community manager? I wasn't going to be a cohort or nothing. Were you
Right.
at that point, at that whatever stage you're about to describe, where you're looking at hiring a new cohort and thinking, oh, maybe Haley will just be this, or did it kind of just happen? You're like, I guess this will work. Do you know what I mean? How do you plan that?
Yeah.
How do you know there's enough wiggle room in order for that to work long term?
Yeah, it's really scary and weird. That's one of the reasons I like to be a little bit more in the black every month, so we have that wiggle room.
Yeah.
And so, I don't want us to get too big. This is something we can talk about in a bigger picture way in the future and stuff. But it's like, how many people is too many people to be a cohort and to be in on the Game of the Year debates? I think it's a good question. We're at 9 right now. And so like when we brought you on, it was like, hey, community manager, great. And I think, there's still a lot of messaging of like, we're paying you to be a community manager. Don't feel the expectation to jump on all this content. Please don't, or you're going to burn yourself out and not be able to be paid as much. And the good news is we just kept growing financially from that point to then it got to the point of not to kiss your butt too much again in public, but it was like, okay, Haley's so good. What are we doing? Why would we not just give her cohort treatment? Like it's stupid not to. And so that just made complete sense. And so, so we're in a spot now where it's like, I guess it's two different questions. So focusing on Biscuit's question about specific milestones needed to hit to pay another person full time. It's a really tricky one to gauge. You never know when our numbers are inflated. If it's like, hey, if we hit this goal on Patreon, we can hire somebody full time. That's awesome. Then they jump on and people don't like the next deepest dive we do and our numbers drop. And it's like, we now have to cut this person's salary if we can't afford it. Like that type of stress seems really, really challenging compared to the current model that we have of contracting, especially people that are hourly, where worst case scenario, in the interest of being sustainable, worst case scenario, if our funding just bottoms out, which is always possible, it's like worst case scenario is we just bring people on for slightly less content and then we save that money that way. We don't do the equivalent of like doing that stream where we go through all the towns, where it's like, okay, if that's with a bunch of people who are paid hourly, that's a pretty expensive thing to do. And it's nice that we can do that now. And I think it all averages out to being like, oh, we're just creating content and paying the people accordingly. So having that flexibility is really important. So to be honest, the second full-time hire, it kind of freaks me out. If we get to the point of like financially, it's such a slam dunk and there's a lot of people that are eager to do it, we can definitely look at that again for where we're at for min-max here. But I don't know if us growing to the point of now we're a 6-person full-time operation, I don't know. Like, again, maybe it financially just makes total sense that we should and we have that much support. But at the same time, it's like, I don't know. I don't know what that content would look like at that point. I don't know if it would look that much different. It would just kind of make us more prone to collapse if the community funding drops out.
Yeah.
And so it's a weird one. And so there's 1,000 angles for this too, because it's also, there's a financial aspect of just kind of, it's terrifying. There's also the part of it of like, what would they be doing if we brought somebody else on full time? Like, because the interesting thing about min-max is a lot of people jump in to support us on Patreon because of the group and the group dynamics, which is wonderful. And they like the content where we're a group. But basically everybody that we contract with has so much other stuff going on. No, everybody has so much other stuff going on that it's like, if we brought on another person full time, that doesn't mean that suddenly every other cohort's more available for creating content.
Alleviating anything,
That's the weird part, right? It's like the choke point is everybody's schedule to get together as a group. And I feel like that's not going anywhere. If there's some wild thing where everybody wanted to drop all their other projects and full-time jobs and jump on and all 9 of us wanted to be full-time at min-max, that would be different. But you look at that dollar amount versus what we do now for income we'd have to make that sustainable, and we'd have to be a Kind of Funny to make that happen.
Yeah.
And then also I look at, Kind of Funny's cranking out so much content. They're doing a great job over there. Business-wise, I think they're really smart. But it's a situation of like, you look at the amount of content that Kind of Funny does, the community happiness for Kind of Funny versus the amount of content that min-max does, the community happiness for min-max. And I feel like we're not night and day for the gaps there. And so I feel good about like our kind of part-time flexible contract basis. And so I'm thinking about like, what would that look like to have another person full-time? What would they be doing when stress other cohorts out? And it's like, if we had the equivalent of, to use a second win example, if we had the equivalent of a Yahtzee or someone that was just like a juggernaut in the community and a lot of people were joining because of them or converting to Patreon because of them, and they could just create this content on their own and do that full time, like that makes sense. What would make the most sense. But I think that's kind of super rare thing to build up. And so those are just the questions that I'm wondering is financially, if it makes sense, it makes sense. At the same time, I'm so happy with the level of efficiency here for MinMax, for the amount of input from the community financially versus what we're able to crank out creatively. That's like, oh, how does that math work? And can we still be efficient if we're bringing on another person full time, or is that just going to mean more behind the scenes meetings and kind of nonsense? And I don't know, getting kind of bogged down in two-person bureaucracy, which sounds like nothing, but it is something, you know?
No, for sure.
Does that make sense, Haley? I know I'm rambling too much.
No, that makes sense. I never thought about the full timer doesn't alleviate work of the other contracted parties. Like that.
Right.
That is the weird hitch to that thought, is if we all were only working for MinMax, obviously that would just naturally be a benefit. I'm trying to think of, it's the kind of thing that you need to like think about quietly for a few hours. You know, there's a lot of different, which I'm sure you do every night in bed.
Yeah, that's it.
Sleep. It's the kind of thing where, I mean, you and other outlets like MinMax are largely pioneering this business model. So obviously there's spots in it that naturally arise up that, and it's different for everyone, right? Like, you know, kind of funny, obviously so different, but it's interesting to hear you say the comparisons between like content created versus, that's really what it boils down to. As long, I think if you're able to sustain the work you're doing, your users are happy with the amount of content being created, the contracted parties are happy with the amount of work they have to do versus, you know, how much they're paid. It doesn't really matter if you scale up to a kind of funny size or be the min-max size. It's like, that's ultimately just success there, right? Like,
right. I do understand
that balance is the biggest thing, which it seems like that's the thing you care the most about.
Yeah. And, you know, if we doubled our Patreon support overnight, if people really love the next deepest dive we did, which is possible, you know, which is still the wild thing about this entire structure.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's totally fair for, if you're chipping in $5 a month and it's like, wait, where is this money going to? Like, it's just, are they just all secretly getting wildly paid over the amount that they should for this type of stuff? Like, that's really fair. Like, our numbers are public, so you can check that out on our Patreon page. And so that's the thing is, you know, where we're at right now is I really am thankful for the spot we're in. You know, the fact that we can bring on people like Haley, and I love having that flexibility with the current budget of, we can afford to have this weird one-off for like the big September meetup and fly all the cohorts out and pay for these trips, or, you know, fly for GDC or Summer Game Fest. You know, we haven't really talked about it, and we can talk about it more, but for Summer Game Fest this year, Janet Garcia is going to be out there in LA, obviously. I'm going out there for the first time, and then Charles Hart is going to be joining us as well. And so like that's a nice feeling to be like, oh, he's never been to like an industry event, and because of your support on Patreon, we can afford to bring him out there. And it's going to be the first time he's like meeting a lot of his Game Informer colleagues and stuff. But he's technically going to be there as MinMax's video editor going on appointments, but he's still going to be taking like some Game Informer appointments and stuff like that. But like having the flexibility for that type of cool, surprising stuff that might be a little more expensive, like a trip. I love having that wiggle room in a budget. And so it'd have to be a really strong pitch to have a second full-time person, which would take up a lot of that wiggle room, you know?
Yeah.
And how would that second person full-time, like, is there a world where they could pay for themselves with the content they'd be doing?
Yeah.
I don't know what that content would be. It'd have to be the most efficient converter of people to Patreon of all time. And I just don't think that exists. But then I don't know. There's a lot of things to debate.
What about, maybe I'm thinking now about the type of employee you would hire full time instead of a personality hire who's creating content, just a min-max business manager. And all they do is all the Patreon stuff, all the organizing, setting up meetings, setting up guests, making ad content, making promotional posts, making the videos that go at the end of every, you know, all that stuff that you do. So then you can be on more content, and then that would alleviate, because like you are the person you're talking about, right? Like you are that one that people would pay for to,
right.
You know, that's you. So if you were to hire somebody who is essentially alleviating all of that work on your plate that is very hard to teach and would be time. It would be a lot of time to transfer them over to the point where it does feel good and natural, and things are not
Yes.
just you teaching them everything over and over and getting frustrated about that. That would essentially make it so you just get to be on more content, which would then alleviate the other stuff.
Correct. However, here's the fun wrinkle here, and this is something we've talked about in a couple different ways in min-max, is that all sounds great, but to keep that person in the loop and on the same page as you,
They have to be everywhere.
they'd have to be everywhere, and it would be like multiple meetings a week, and it'd be multiple times a day having communications with them, but like, oh, message this thing this way, and then this goes over here, and it's like just spreading that workload out. It, you know,
But if you were paying someone a full-time salary, it could be their
Yeah.
full-time job to listen to every stream, to be
Yeah.
on top of everything. Because I know the Game Grumps, just because I happened to listen to them, they had Allie, who was just essentially that job. Like, she sat in for every live stream. She was at every meeting. She followed them around. She did everything from 9 to 5. And then she was able to
Yeah.
be up and catching up on, okay, episode 5 has to go up on Thursday because of X, Y. Like, she just knew all that finesse stuff. Because if you were to pay them the full-time year salary, that would be the thought, is like, they don't just hang out and wait for you to message them. They would have to be paying attention to every piece of content getting made.
Yep. No, that's the thing for sure. The dark part of it, I suppose, is yeah, but I like doing all that stuff.
And that's valid, right? Like, that's fair.
Yeah.
I definitely know, because I'm the same way. It's just that hump of getting to the point where they're good at it would suck and might take a few
Yep.
months, and it would feel like lost money almost, because it just feels like you're just doing the same job still, and all you're doing is teaching someone it.
Yeah.
But it could reach a point where, and then if you ever lose that person too, it's just like starting at square
That's
one
brutal.
again to teach
That's
somebody.
brutal.
Yeah, it's like, it would be hard for retention stuff, but
Yeah. But hey, speaking of losing somebody, I need to get rolling here. I think my
sure.
family's home, and they're going to make a big, loud mess in the house, as they should. So I should probably bow out
as
from
they
this living
should.
room set.
No worries. Thanks for joining, Ben.
All good. All good. Thanks for having me. I'll talk to you later.
Sounds good. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, wasn't that nice? So much business talk. Ben with his new house, with his fam. Well, thanks everybody for joining me for Bonus Pod. If there's anybody in the MinMax Council tier who wants to check their hand up, I can hang up for another 10 minutes or so, and we could chat. No pressure though, if there's nothing anybody wants to talk about. This week I can talk about the let me see if I can open this here. Any stream with Leo tonight? I actually have to chat with Leo. I haven't chatted with Leo today. Today was a vacation day for me in Canada. I did have to work a little bit because I have a client who didn't realize that he needed an end user licensing agreement for Tuesday, which is because his publisher didn't tell him, which is so valid. So I was working on that for him today and yesterday. So I was working on it this weekend. But largely was taking it easy today, which is nice. So I'm going to bump Leo. I can't say 100% sure, so I will let you know about that. But yeah, maybe I'll just close out. Looks like we have nobody who wants to pop up and chit-chat about anything. That's totally fine. Thank you so much for hanging out with Ben and I today. That was a very enlightful conversation. Ben reached out to me last week and said, I want to chat business. So let's chat business. And I said, sure. I like hearing about this behind the scenes stuff. It's very enlightening. And I'm sure other people who are considering doing Patreon ventures and stuff like that would find these kind of behind the scenes talks pretty crucial, because a lot of time it really just comes down to information that's kept behind closed doors and not knowing how all this works. And like, as I was saying before, this is kind of pioneering a new business model. This Patreon based like crowdfunding business model, there's other ways to do it, obviously, than how Patreon works, and I'm sure in the past businesses were run with a similar style of business model, but this is it's an interesting way that MinMax is run. I think it largely works very, very well, and everything flow. I was very impressed coming on with how everything worked so naturally and easily, like organizing content, who's available for what, who's busy one week can be on more stuff the next. It all seems to work out really well and really efficiently. And that's coming from me, who also works full-time outside of MinMax, that I'm able to find time for stuff like Bonus Pod. and chat with all of you. So thank you so much for joining this week. A fun thing is in the Discord, we'll have a Hellblade 2 channel going up today. So look out for that. And yeah, you can support MinMax on Patreon at any tier to get access to the Discord. Or if you join at the MinMax Council tier, the $20 tier, you can hang out with me and Ben and any other guests to chat bonus pod stuff. A fun announcement, next week I'm going to be joined by Haley DeBoom. Woo! Which was a long time coming. I'm so excited to finally chat with Haley. I loved the episode she was on back on MinMax a few months ago. I met her in California when I was at GDC. She's super cool. So we're going to have a Haley Squared episode. That'll be next week. So look forward to that. And the Haley show next week, exactly. And before I head out, let's check one final check on how that poll's doing. So go to patreon.com/minmax, join at any tier, and you could vote on where we're going to be doing our big meetup, as Ben was mentioning. And Asheville is still in the lead. 50 votes for Asheville, but it's pretty close. 50 for Asheville, 40 right now for Akron, Ohio, and 36 third, Williamsburg, Virginia. So that's very exciting. So I'll check out all you guys next week when Haley DeBoom joins me. And hope you all have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining. Bye. And Twitch people, thank you for watching on Twitch. There was a question I saw. How I was going to read it. Oh, is there a story with the Jake the dog neon sign? Nothing. I just really love Adventure Time, and I bought it because I love Adventure Time with my whole heart. I'm actually finishing regular show for the first time in my life, watching that right now, because I watched it all the way up to this final space season, and I never finished it because I wasn't really into the space stuff. But I love that show also so much. I'm thinking I'll finally finish it. Let me refresh my Steam thing here and see if I can raid you anywhere. Anybody live right now? Kyle Bossman is live playing Barnyard. Like the Barnyard game? Yup, it looks like the Barnyard game. No, wait, is that a golf game? Anyway, let's go see. Thanks everyone on Twitch for hanging out. The regular show ending is great. I'm interested in the arc they're doing with Pops. I don't really know what's going on, but I'm interested. All right, friends, have a great rest of your day. Bye. And in the future, all those watching right now on the Stream Archives channel, thank you. Bye.